The most extraordinary find at the Temple of the Storm God was not the foundations and not any remains of walls, but 23 basalt reliefs that had been inside the temple and miraculously had survived. And so this is more or less as they were found, and we helped with the conservation of them, laser scanning of them, documenting them, and the German-Syrian archaeological team was working on researching who all the figures were and what these might have meant, and matching them up to a number of things that had been written about the Temple of the Storm God throughout history. So one of the things that the archaeologists did was try to line them up along what would have been most probably their area within the temple. And one of the issues was, because they are basalt and they were originally inside the temple, they couldn't be left out to the elements like this. So in fact, in partnership with the Syrian government and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, we were engaged for several years in discussions about how best to protect them over time. And this was all in about 2007, 8, and 9 when we were having these discussions. And the issues were leaving them in place under some kind of temporary shelter, building some sort of site museum or sort of gentle on the earth shelter, building an actual site museum. And there's in fact a theater from the 1980s that was built on the Citadel. So there's a precedent for building an actual building on the Citadel. Also, obviously, moving them to a national museum within Syria was another option. And as we were going round and round, very unfortunately, the Syrian director of the archaeological program passed away. So that sort of gave an opportunity to say, well, since we can't really decide what's the best way to deal with them, let's put them in a protective shelter. So they were all fully documented. They were put under layers and layers of sandbagging. This not very beautiful but effective temporary shelter was put on. And we were thinking about holding another design workshop to think about the best final systematic arrangement for them. And then, as we know, war broke out in Syria. And so, we felt the citadel of Aleppo is unlikely to be penetrated. There have been a lot of reports about the army and the insurgents variously taking parts of Aleppo. There were pictures of the bronze doors at the entrance gate being blown out, but there did not seem to be any news of any danger to the site. And we kept monitoring this with colleagues who are still in Aleppo. And so, as I said, we were working on potential design solutions that were just sort of mothballed. And here's just another shot of it under its protective shelter. And then very, very unfortunately, literally just last Thursday, a colleague wrote to us to tell us just how bad things were in Aleppo and that indeed the citadel was more vulnerable. And in the early days of the outbreak of war in Syria, one of the first things we all heard on the news was that the souk in Aleppo, again, one of the oldest continuously used marketplaces in the region, had burned. And so we all had these images in our mind. But, we were fairly certain that the Temple of the Storm God would not be of interest to anybody. And then again, this is one of the hotels across the street from the Citadel, mid-19th century building that was still in use. And then we started getting photos like this from our colleagues. But very, very sadly, last Thursday, this was the photo that was sent to Bonnie Burnham, our president, and me, showing that indeed, finally somebody had developed some curiosity about what was underneath that shelter. And much to our dismay, the entire shelter has been dismantled and the sandbags seem to be gone. And there were thousands and thousands of sandbags. So this took quite an effort. And we can see in the pictures some of the remains of the basalt reliefs. But I think, all of us who were involved in this project will probably regret forever and ever that we didn't simply agree to have them moved away to a museum somewhere in Syria. But, one hopes that one day it'll be possible to see just what shape they're really in, and maybe these photos aren't as dismaying as they seem.